Hello everybody. I see. So here we have already some chat. So as I see everybody's coming up and joining, and it's amazing to see all these familiar names. So I'm very excited. And usually I see people because we're on the gallery, but here they will be raising hands and in the Q&A and fantastic. So Joe, I wanted to say hello. You and I've connected a few minutes before. So this is our little conversation that we're continuing. Basically, we've been speaking for a few months over, and this is out of these deep conversation, we decided to do this webinar. So I'm gonna let everybody join. Hello to all. And I'm going to start by introducing you and introducing the conversation we're going to have with archetypes. The idea is that we are going to start a conversation that should last maybe 30, 40 minutes. And after that, we will allow anybody who wants to join and ask questions and be part of the chat to chime in and ask questions. So, hi, everybody. Everybody's sending little hello notes and ciao from Italians and from people who are all over the world. So this is fun. So Joe, for those of you who don't know Joe Siff, I'm very excited to introduce you to Joe. Joe has 20 plus years in the fashion industry. Not like everybody who's been in the 20 years in the fashion industry, because she had her first 15 years with one of the most visionary and revered brands, which was Comme des Garçons, and then went on with another absolutely incredible brand, which was Prada. And she was then the CEO of Victorinox. And she is currently a brand mentor and C-suite advisor with a focused 360 on fully integrated business advice. She works with startups to help them spotlight them and help them with their narrative and creating that true personality and how to show up in the world. And at the core of her work is creating archetypes for these brands. So I want Joe to jump in immediately and first ask you how the archetypes came into your life.
Thank you, Agathe. It's a pleasure to be here. Firstly, I want just to say that I believe that having a good understanding of identity and the motivations behind decision-making can help provide clarity around purpose and goals. In 2006, I was recruited to Victorinox from Prada to helm their global apparel division and reposition the men's branded sportswear collection and launch a women's collection, all at the level of Prada Sport, so at a more elevated level. So I had fresh eyes on the Victorinox brand and business operations. And this was a wonderful challenge, an opportunity for me to test my mettle and also to leverage the 20 plus years I had spent within two very rich and clear brand cultures and successful businesses.
And very rigorous brands, right? They were very rigorous brands. They were
rigid, very consistent, very demanding of all stakeholders and you know, anyone who was interfacing with clients, with the consumers, you know, all touch points of these brands were beautifully executed and integrated. You always knew where you were when you came into contact with these brands. And, you know, this has a lot to do with control, tight control from the top. So after 18 months with Victorinox, I was invited to join an executive brand board. And this board consisted of 8 corporate heads of the company from different product divisions. And if anyone's not familiar with Victorinox, it's a consumer goods company that consists of pocket tools and knives, watches, travel gear, apparel, and fragrance. So this board was formed in anticipation of Victorinox's 125th anniversary. Investments were about to be made in an array of global events and marketing initiatives, the rollout of a flagship, a retail flagship store concept in several capital cities. But the board was also formed because the owners of Victorinox, fourth generation owner operators of the company, wanted to establish a clear brand voice. There had been, evidence of inconsistencies sort of popping up in advertising, depending on which product category. So they were aware that there were diverse interpretations and applications of brand marketing. And they wanted to address the fact that there was a lack of clarity around the brand identity. And they wanted to ensure that the story of Victorinox was told clearly and consistently across all product divisions in anticipation of 2009, which was the 125th anniversary of the company. So I had an opportunity to use this brand board platform in a way to register my observations and some of my concerns coming into the company, and to voice those and potentially course correct those, so that there was consistency during that important year. So I suggested that we archetype Victorinox and focus on the original Swiss Army knife, which is the brand's most iconic and widely distributed product around the world. So this was confirmed. And just to give you some background, I'm familiar with the archetypes. In part, my father was a student of Freud and Jung. He believed in psychoanalysis and the benefits of psychoanalysis. Growing up, I read the great books, Greek mythology, philosophers, Socrates, Plato. I was aware of the use of archetypes in advertising, and kind of recognized the presence of archetypes in characters in films and theater. So I was somewhat predisposed. Also, while Victorinox was being archetyped, I happened to read a book called The Hero and the Outlaw by Margaret Mark and Carol Pearson. And this is the first book that I was aware of that delved into the relationship between archetypes and building brands, building extraordinary brands. And there are lots of examples in this book.
So, but Joe, I think it's very interesting because, when we initially talked, at first I was so excited to talk because, we work in the same industry for many years, and we never had a chance to meet. I always had heard of you, but it's very interesting because you lived with Comme des Garçons and Prada in brands who had naturally been very archetyped. And as you said, it's about control. It's being that, everybody who comes, whether it's an employee, a client, advertising, whatever, sees something very precise about the brand, right? The core of the brand is very clear.
Yeah.
And so, and I remember you telling me about your father and all these books that were around your youth and childhood. And so you merged these two by when you started with Victorinox, right? So Victorinox was a way for you to really embody this knowledge that you had into a brand. So, right, that's
Yes.
how it felt. It felt natural time for you.
I'm sorry, to what? I missed your question.
To join your knowledge of of your education and your surroundings into a brand, right? And to bring consciously in a brand the knowledge of archetypes and structuring those archetypes.
Yeah, I saw in some ways, a parallel between the history of Victorinox. It was founded in 1884, and Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst. Their stories sort of parallel each other. So I thought, oh, this is interesting. This could be an interesting exploration. I had never suggested archetyping a brand before that time, but as someone that had been a brand steward for years within Comme des Garçons and Prada, I was uncomfortable inside Victorinox for the lack of control and the lack of what felt like a lack of urgency. I think when you work, in a seasonal fashion industry, there's this sort of, you're always on the edge of your seat. You're always, planning for the next season, or you're juggling or managing multiple seasons at one time. So the culture, the company culture of Victorinox had a very different sort of cadence to it. And because the company is largely comprised of distributors, there's a very beautiful culture in terms of camaraderie and mutual respect, but in terms of having the rigor and kind of operating in accordance with kind of a corporate or kind of a headquarter vision and guideline, that wasn't as present as I would have liked. So I was also a newly appointed president of the apparel division, and I was a woman. It's a fairly male-oriented culture, Victorinox, and I don't know if apparel. We didn't use the word fashion. I don't know if apparel was really understood by the pocket tool division so much, why it was in this sort of collective of products. I also saw an opportunity to kind of break through some of this dissonance and use the archetype as a way to unify and align not only my fellow division heads, but also my division, because I was introducing a lot of change within my division. Creating some unity and also some anchoring in the face of that change was something I aimed to do.
Can I ask you, Jo, how it's a old or heritage, we would say, brand.
Yes. Yeah.
With a more male dominant, board, even customer base, because it was really an outdoor apparel brand.
Yeah.
How did they receive when you started telling them about archetypes? I mean, did they jump off their seat of excitement, or how did they receive this idea of archetyping the brand?
I think they were open-minded, actually. Again, this was a brand board of eight different members of the company. Most of them, were responsible for the marketing initiatives within their product division. And the owners were absolutely open and supportive of doing it. And there was an openness and a curiosity to kind of undertake that process of being archetyped as a brand. I think there was enough familiarity of Carl Jung as, a psychoanalyst, a psychotherapist, and, kind of his theory of archetypes. And so I think there was curiosity and openness, which led us to confirm, to go ahead with the process. And we brought in 2 archetypists and then began this 4-month process. As Victorinox is a global brand, we kicked off with customer Q&A sessions around the world in 7 key cities around the world, and began the process.
And I imagine also that this was a time where, I mean, it's interesting because Victorinox is a very multiple brand, right? There's apparel, but there's the tools and there's the gear. And so, and as it expands in different cities, there's a risk of diluting the brand, right?
Exactly.
The more product you have, the more cities you are, the more you have to adapt to different geography and customers. So I imagine that the archetype was also to reinforce, right? I think make more clear, precise, and strong the core message of what the brand is, which I think today the market is becoming so vast and so busy that it's a work that anybody could do, should do.
Exactly. It allowed us to really pinpoint clearly the brand values, the brand attributes, really the brand story that cut across product division, cut across, region and territory, gender, and really got down to the universal connectors and values of the brand. So it really, it uncovered tremendous meaning and which informed, all programs and initiatives, regardless of product from that point on. And a brand manifesto was established that detailed all of this, and that really has now serves, very much as a go-to resource and manual, across the entire organization. And there was a pledge to adhere to this manifesto. And so the 125th anniversary story was told, celebrating the brand values universally. And it inspired everyone.
Great. So I'm sure everybody's wondering what brand archetype Victorinox was. So I don't know if, I know I have a chart, a wheel. Do you want me to share that and you telling us what Victorinox? And I know we've talked, I've asked Joe also, some famous brands and maybe Comme des Garçons or Prada, what kind of brand archetypes. So let me share my screen and maybe you can tell us a bit about the Victorinox. And I'm also going to put in the message for everybody your website.
Yes, which is
I'm going to put
my name.
for yes. Thank you, Joe. Here is Joe's website and link. So Joe, so when I'm pulling this, so tell us what Victorinox was. What is the
archetype that was uncovered was the visionary warrior. And the visionary warrior is a hybrid of the explorer archetype and the hero archetype. It was a hybrid proposition, with the hero being the primary archetype and the explorer being the secondary archetype. So is the map illuminated?
Nope, the map does not want to come. I'm just going to pull it again because it's coming. There we go. And I'm gonna. And please, I wanted to also share that you can post your questions in the chat room. And there is also, I'm going to put Jo's LinkedIn profile. So if anybody wants to send her a little message, they can.
So just to elaborate on the archetype that was uncovered, the visionary warrior, the motivations behind these two archetypes. So this is a character compass. It sort of maps archetypes by universal need in the center of this circle, of this mandala, I call it. You have, well, you'll note that the hero falls in the, in leaving the legacy, leaving a legacy, mastery being its core desire. And then secondly, you have the explorer, whose core desire is independence, freedom, exploring, new terrain. It's a quest to explore, uncharted territories. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you told me that most brands in the fashion industry fall into kind of these.
Well, many of the brands that I have archetype fall into the magician archetype, the creator, the lover, the explorer, and the outlaw. I have not yet archetyped a jester brand or an innocent brand. So
maybe times are changing, and maybe some innocent brands should come into the surface, right?
Absolutely, I hope so.
And
I hope so.
With the,
but in any ways, the archetype, the visionary warrior, protects, aims to protect, to save and redeem society. There's a quest of transformation to be achieved, to triumph over adversity, reaching a higher plane of consciousness. The explorer aims to push boundaries, and in doing so, discover new frontiers, and to live independently, to find freedom in nature. So
we already have a suggestions from one of the panelists, one in the chat, saying that Moschino is a jester. So
Moschino is the jester. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So perhaps do you want to share? I know that, I'm sure that you understand that you've archetyped Comme des Garçons and maybe Prada. Do you want to walk us through how a brand,
sure,
how an archetype shows up for a customer? How for example, for us that we know Victorinox or Comme des Garçons or even Prada, how does it show up for the customer?
Okay. I mean,
how is it expressed?
The point of archetyping is to create a bridge between the brand and the customer. First, just to share Comme des Garçons. So I worked in the company for more than 15 years. And while I've not officially archetyped Comme des Garçons, I know the brand intimately. And I would venture to say that Comme des Garçons is the creator archetype. So the creator stretches the imagination, is driven to innovate. There's pure energy and freedom to express. Comme des Garçons challenges notions of convention. So there's a bit of the rebel archetype. But that all falls under the creator. The creator really is fearless and is driven to imagine and to put out into the world something that's never been seen. And this absolutely captures Kao Kubo-san's motivations. And if you consider the customers who are attracted to the brand, customers are attracted to the fearlessness, the innovation, the idea of discovering something that maybe has never existed. There's a lot of identification with the brand in that regard. Creates a very loyal following. And I'm really talking about Comme des Garçons in its original, incarnation. Brands mature, and archetypes can evolve. If you consider, the kind of rotation of creative directors that take the helm of some of the luxury brands.
Yes.
Alessandro Michele, for example, at Gucci. I think his vision and how he is kind of creating, sort of a fresh new image that affects all touch points of the brand, it's quite different from the original Gucci. Yes. I would say there are elements of the jester in Gucci now under Michele. The animation.
That's very that's very interesting. Yeah, because I remember my grandmother having a Gucci watch, which was very old school. So for a brand that has been like Gucci, that has lived through many, many different directors, it's an interesting conversation you're saying, because then the brand has an archetype, but then a designer comes and gives maybe the secondary archetype or moves the archetype in a different direction. How would you say that relationship happens?
No, it's absolutely true. When I was thinking about Prada, I archetype Prada, for the benefit of our conversation, based on Mrs. Prada being at the helm of creative, but also having a lot of influence on business decisions, and Patrizio Bertelli, being her partner. And the archetype of Prada is a hybrid. I believe it's a hybrid of the magician and rebel archetypes. The rebel sort of in some ways reflecting Mrs. Prada's, more counterculture, more intellectual, provocative approach to collections. The magician really kind of reflecting Bertelli's, sort of desire to transform, for the sake of really creating something kind of fresh and imaginative. So, Mrs. Prada being a rule breaker, and putting forward very daring and intellectual ideas, and Bertelli, being kind of empowering force in his own right, driven, by transformation, a more sort of visionary mind. So the rebel magician, comes together in their dynamic contrast as leaders, with Raf Simons now in the mix. It either reinforces the archetype, which is what I'm observing in these, first two seasons or first few shows that we've seen. I think it's reinforcing, and I, knowing Raf Simons' movement, from his own brand to Jules Sander to Calvin Klein and now to Prada, I think he's a very good excavator of brand culture, and I think that's what's happening, at least at this early stage at Prada.
I want to ask you, so first there's already a question, so I want to bring them there. And so the book you were mentioning, is that The Hero and the Outlaw? So that people have been asking the book. Margaret.
This is The Hero and the Outlaw.
Okay, I'll put it in the link.
Published in 2001. by McGraw-Hill, written by Margaret Mark and Carol Pearson. It's a great book. It's an amazing book. What the book doesn't do is apply a methodology to archetyping brands, but it goes into a lot of depth and a lot of examples of great brands and their archetypes.
And so I want to ask you, so there's already a few questions that are very interesting. One of it is sustainability is a pillar of future brands. Do you see this applicable to all archetypes, or it can only fall under specific archetypes? What would you say sustainability has? Does sustainability have an archetype?
Sustainability.
Yes.
I mean, that's a brand value. That's an important brand value. Sustainability was absolutely part of the Victorinox archetype, protector of the environment, as personified in the warrior, in the hero. It's part of a brand value. And I think it can manifest actually in a number of different archetypes. Caregiver, hero, the lover. The lover is an archetype, that the core desire of the lover is, love and beauty and intimacy. I've archetyped a brand that is based entirely on the material from which the collection is made: organic cotton in a field coupe, a weaving technique with a family-owned, multi-generational mill in Italy. And she wouldn't have a brand without having a commitment to this mill and the material that the mill produces. So a lot of her, her brand values and how she operates as a brand ties right back into sustainability. So can manifest in different archetypes.
Joe, this is very interesting because I think that one of the questions from Véronique Gabay was interesting. Say, could you give a few more examples so we understand how to fully grasp the concept? And I think that's where, between the archetype and how it is manifested in a brand, like, is the way you use the product, is it through the words that you use in the communication language? Is it in the building of the teams? Can you give us some examples?
Yes.
Maybe of a lover brand. What would be a lover brand?
Chanel's a lover brand. Hermes is a lover brand.
Tell us a little bit on how, like, some examples of how it manifests in the day-to-day of a brand or the organization of brand.
Yeah, it manifests on a product level. It manifests on a digital marketing level, at retail. Your processes, your team, how you communicate with your customer, how you communicate with your clients. And I differentiate customers being consumers and clients being retail partners, third-party retail partners. It manifests really across all touch points of a brand.
So can you say, for example, so between a magician, right? Or between a magician brand, such as product, we wanted to take one archetype, and a Chanel brand who would be a lover, what would you say, how would their communication be different? Like, how is, or a product be different? Yeah. Is it because there's fewer of them in the magician, or that the prices are higher, or how would you?
Yeah. So, Agathe, we are sharing a handout to the participants. And in that handout, I profile a magician brand. It was an artisanal wellness brand. And the magician is also the transformer, the alchemist. So this brand, in terms of imagery for advertising, marketing, is focused on the power of transformation. Maybe delving into sort of the scientific processes, of creating a product and highlighting that, and then also kind of the impact that in this case, is a series of aromatherapeutic, inhalers and aromatherapeutic based products. Literally the ability to kind of alter someone's day from maybe being an everyday to being a magical day. The lover communicates in a very intimate communication with its customer, and attention to every detail, sort of communicating a love of materials, a love of the customer. Maybe it has the product has a more poetic and romantic quality to it. The brand has a deep respect for the artisans and makers of the product, and perhaps that's somehow noted in on the garment itself, or in the product itself, or in the packaging, maybe in the brand's digital presence, profiles, of behind the scenes of the making of the product, to put a spotlight, a highlight on kind of, what may not be, just the kind of the depth of creation behind the product. I'm hoping that makes sense. Yeah.
So first I want to tell you, Joe, and that I have been so enjoyed the different conversation we've had, because I feel the passion you have for all these brands, and I feel that you are almost, the soul. You look at brands as their soul. You look at the brands that they, the soul that they have, and how to bring to light that really internal energy and force that they are. I know that you work with, established brands, but you work also with startups, and also with designers, so that they are at the core of what they express in the world, the creativity, that it is, preciously established, so that their core is really clear and well known to everyone, so that the customer and the clients know who that brand is. I want to ask you, would you be willing to take all these questions, because I think those questions are going to be informing a little bit our audience.
Of course.
Are you well?
Of course.
Question.
Of course. It would be a pleasure. I think maybe before we start the questions, I wanted to explain, after I wrapped up my tenure at Victorinox, I took on a startup brand as their president. And what I observed early on was a lack of originality in the product, and a lot of pressure on this young designer to be successful, to be a viable business in a short period of time. So I also observed in the designer that she was predisposed to therapy. So I suggested that we archetype her. And that was the first time I archetyped a brand myself. And it was kind of a game changer for her, kind of stepping into her shoes and taking kind of ownership of the relationship between herself as a creative being and what she wanted to put out into the world. So it set the tracks for this young designer to really begin to do original work, as opposed to maybe being influenced by more established brands on the market and sort of appropriating or gleaning from those brands. So I saw the power of what that could do in terms of anchoring her, in terms of rooting her in her own story and connecting her own story, which was very interesting to her brand. So that has basically remains, that's why the archetyping a brand is so essential in when, working with a brand in the early stages of their evolutionary state, or with a brand that might be facing certain challenges. Maybe they haven't managed to gain traction commercially. So sort of in the face of challenge, it's always a good idea to archetype a brand. Today, the landscape is changing dramatically. What faces brands today to really to survive, much less compete, is tremendous. So archetyping is a way to kind of set roots into a brand and put a lens, a framework and a lens over the brand, and to ensure that there is alignment across, all involved, or to demand it. So
yeah, Joe, it resonates a lot because, as somebody who's into recruiting and to helping talent find their next job, I could not agree more on how the clearer you are on what you offer, the easier it is for others to come to you, to either validate or not. But at least, I think, with the changes that are happening, there's so much confusion and speed at which things are happening, that the more you are clear and specific on one archetype or one big energy, the easier it is for others to resonate in others, right?
Yes. And if you can archetype sort of in the early stages, and you can do it from within the company, starting with the founders, looking into the archives, digging into the product, the materials, kind of everything that sort of the brand touches and impacts, then you really have an authentic archetype. There are, marketing agencies and advertising agencies that sort of, assign an archetype to a brand that might resonate or connect more directly to the target consumer. That's not what I do. So I get into the kitchen and start opening drawers and cabinets. And
well, because you're very, I think, Joe, what I find very interesting is the fashion industry is such, as I said, a busy market, and we can get very confused and we can be driven only by sales. And I think that you have, for me, you learn from, a Comme des Garçons or Prada, which are very, very strong and specific. So you have that rigor. You had this, no noise. You cut through the noise. Our conversation, we cut through the noise. There's never a little bit of, there's chit chat, but there's really, you have integrity. And I think that's what today is very appealing, is people who have integrity, who stand strong for what they are and for what they build and what they give to others. And I think that is very appealing. It's very attractive. It's magnetic, in fact, to have people have a strong voice.
Yes. It's necessary.
Yes. Somebody asked, how did the archetyping of Victorinox affect the sales of the brand year over year?
That really wasn't the purpose of archetyping Victorinox. It's a very healthy company, but we did not measure the sales, the impact of sales. It was really to unify the brand voice and to align the product divisions. So certainly specific to the global apparel division, it positively impacted the performance of our division, and set the foundation for what I aimed to do, which was to elevate the product line for both men and to introduce women's. So certainly having that archetype at our fingertips allowed us to execute against our business strategy. But in terms of actually relating it, having a quantifiable report, or information to offer, I can just say that it supported the ongoing sustainability of the brand.
Mm-hmm. So one of the questions we have is, in the case of a well-established brand, how do you articulate the perceived archetype by the client versus the archetype the brand wants to be, the owner, the board, or the marketing team?
Do
you think that they could be a brand that has a perceived archetype, but that maybe the company wants to be something else?
It all depends on the company, the company culture. If the company chooses to partner with a brand marketing agency and adopt an archetype that's recommended based on the consumer base. I mean, the goal is to reconcile the two. The goal is not to abandon. If anything, the goal is to reinforce and strengthen the connection between the brand and the consumer, and to grow your consumer base, obviously, because the consumer will recognize where they are when they are interacting with the brand subconsciously. So in terms of perhaps adopting an archetype that's recommended from the outside, it's really a choice of stakeholders and owners of the company. I myself have not experienced that phenomenon, that situation.
Okay, so we have a second question that is also, when brands have primary and secondary archetype, do they typically fall within the same core motive?
No.
For example, brand is a hybrid of the magician and the rebel, which are both rooted in the legacy. Is this typical?
No.
Or could they be in different part of the spectrum?
Absolutely. No. The presence of a secondary archetype, it's not always the case that there is the presence of a secondary archetype. And a brand may choose to adopt just a primary archetype and kind of operate in that lane, but no, oftentimes it's kind of the beauty of opposites, of maybe sort of the dynamic of kind of opposing energies and motivations that are making this sort of complex, multifaceted archetype, with the goal to maybe reach a broader audience, a broader range of customers.
Nice. So we have one more question of, how do you choose the archetype? Is it based on heritage or new possible manifestation of the brand, or both? And what are the practical advantages of identifying the archetype?
The process that I undertake is usually a 4-week process, and we begin to kind of excavate every touch point, every component of the brand. We start with product. I interview the brand founder. Oftentimes it's a designer. We go through a series of questionnaires and interviews. We'll dig into customer profiles. We'll look at brand imagery, press, the website, of course, all digital channels. And really, the interview process and the questionnaire process are the most revealing in terms of working with brands in their early stage. And, we'll go into dreams and, insights and, historical stories that all relate back to why the brand was founded in the first place. So it's really through that process that the discovery is made, and we map the first of the kind of, universal sort of psychological zones, and then begin a second phase of drilling down. We'll do a SWOT analysis. We'll look at the competitive landscape that the brand is sitting, on, and begin to just refine and narrow the choices until we arrive at our findings, our first findings, and then that's shared with the brand owner, and then we'll dig further until we confirm the archetype.
So the questions keep coming, Joe, because I think it's quite a fascinating subject. And I want to interject one question before there's 3 more question to answers. But I also want to tell everybody, because I'm realizing it's almost 2:00, that Joe has created a little summary of what archetyping is that I'm going to share right now into the chat. And if you've signed up in this to this webinar, you will be receiving it by the email. So with a replay of the video. So thank you, Joe, for this gift to everyone, because
Sure.
you kind of summarized a little bit the process and what archetypes. So can I ask you, what is your favorite archetype? Do you have a favorite archetype?
Well, I do love the magician archetype, I have to say. It's a beautiful archetype. Just it's all about process, transformation. I think it speaks to this moment in time. It's really a beautiful archetype. And I have had the pleasure of discovering that archetype in many of the brands that I've worked with. So in very different manifestations. And really, once the archetype is revealed, the greatest satisfaction is when the brand really applies the archetype to what they're doing. That's the greatest affirmation, is to see them really adopt it and apply it, whether it's on a product level or communication level and branding level. And then, of course, to see what impact that has on growing brand awareness, on building the business. It gives them, that tool, that clarity. Mm-hmm. So I myself am the sage archetype, and it absolutely, speaks to.
I'm putting that back again.
What motivates me, what drives me and what I do. Digging into knowledge, digging for the truth, revealing the truth, not tolerating untruths. So it's been a challenging 4 years in the world.
I think we will need a lot of sages for this this time. And I'm happy that you are saying that, the magician is also an interesting archetype. I'm happy also there's tons of lovers, because I think, that's a beautiful way to share your product, and having that as a foundation.
Yes.
And I think caregivers, what would be a brand that is a caregiver?
Oh, Dove, um, uh, a lot of nonprofit organizations are caregiver brands, um, service-driven
Yes.
brands you will find in the caregiver uh, archetype.
So you're inspiring so much so that the question is, what kind of training you suggest to do to be more knowledgeable in this field?
I mean, I suggest this book, The Hero and the Outlaw, is a very good starting place. And I think if you read this book cover to cover, and then you can sort of test yourself, watch some really great sort of iconic films, and you can begin to apply the archetypes to, you know, some of the characters in the film. Wonder Woman's a good place to start.
Yes, that's fantastic. What is Wonder Woman? What archetype is she?
Oh, she's the hero outlaw. Yeah, she's the hero outlaw. You know.
So how does your approach differ when archetyping a startup brand versus a heritage brand?
The process is a little different. There's, you know, usually an opportunity to really get great findings, great information from the consumer. So that adds, you know, a whole other layer into the analysis, and serves to reinforce, you know, what's being excavated on the brand side to see if the two sides are actually meeting. And with a brand, you know, established like Victorinox, Comme des Garçons, Prada, etc., you have that, you see that by their own success.
We have one more question by Michelle. Have you ever archetyped anything other than established and startup brands? Have you ever archetyped anything other than established and startup brands? And I think you spoke that you sometimes work with designers, directly creators.
I had the opportunity to archetype the artist Jean-Michel Basquiat. Actually, after he had passed away, his sisters approached me because they had a t-shirt brand, and they really didn't know what they were doing with it. One of the sisters is a coach, actually, and the other sister is an accountant. So they weren't, you know, really familiar with the apparel business, the industry. So through them, I was able to, when I knew Jean-Michel back in the 80s, and was a friend and was very protective of him and what was happening as he was sort of rising, you know, to fame at a very young age. Of course, you know, I knew his work and his tragic story. But meeting his sisters, I had an opportunity to dig into the family history, where he grew up, how you know, just his early childhood story, you know, and his relationships with his parents, and particularly his mother, and his father, for that matter. So I did have the opportunity to archetype Jean-Michel Basquiat in the context of advising his sisters on what to do with their t-shirt brand, and actually together we agreed to establish a brand in honor of their brother, called Crown by Basquiat. Basquiat's archetype was the explorer. While maybe on the surface he appeared to be the rebel archetype, he was really the explorer. He was about not being tied down, really about independence and freedom to express himself. He was a great lover of travel. So that's an example of a brand or an artist that was archetyped, that kind of serving as a foundation for forming a brand. with his sisters.
It's interesting. And Joe, I think what is fascinating, because I remember when we spoke a few weeks ago, that I think the way you said it, you were kind of a bridge between the brand ethos and the consumer behavior. And,
Yes.
archetyping is really going into that brand ethos and making sure. And I think in today with, all the changes that we have to navigate, the constant change, I think it can reinvigorate a brand from the inside, and make sure that we stand for strong values. We stand for. So I remember you said, I can't remember, but I think there was a call to arms, right?
Yes.
Of bringing a strong archetype and
Yeah.
and rallying consumers behind that. Can you share a bit more about that?
I mean, I think to open yourself or your brand up to being archetype, it's revealing, the deepest kind of energies and motivations within the brand, and being willing to go through that process to arrive at, a clear brand identity, and then to use that from that point forward, as as sort of a beacon, and in a sense, it is a call to arms, and it's a test. How deep do we want to go here? And I think particularly when you're a young brand, it's very easy to be influenced by outside forces. You listen to a lot of expert recommendations, and it's a way to kind of cut through the veil, and really to see things for what they really are. So to arrive back at your core. So I think with the challenges that we're facing today, it's one way to kind of equip yourself, for all that is being faced, along with other things. Obviously it needs to be married with a strong, business strategy, and addressing many of the kind of demands that are facing brands and companies today.
Mm-hmm. I love the strong image. I know it's 2:04, so I want to make sure that we close, because I would certainly imagine plenty of other questions, but I think you allowed us to discover a bit what brand archetypes can do for companies, but also for consumers, for marketers, for all these different touch points into a brand. I think it's very interesting, and in these very explosive times, having strong navigating direction, having determined or strong archetyping, and knowing which archetype we are attracted to as consumers, I think is very important too, right? Imagine that if you like a certain, right? If you like a certain type of, sorry, go ahead.
I have found it very useful.
Yeah. So I imagine that if you had like 4 or 5 brands that you're attracted, if you're attracted always to magician brands, or if you're always attracted to lover brands, it says also as much about us that it says about the brand, right?
I think it's good to have a variety, without question. I'd love to archetype a jester brand. That would be a fabulous challenge. And in every man or every woman brand. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see.
Very good. Well, Joe, thank you very much. I wanted to say that I could listen for you, and I'm sure you inspired many people to read that book and dig deeper. I put your website. I wanted to tell everybody that they will receive your document that in the email that will follow, and they have your website also. So you will be, if anybody wants to connect with you through your website. And I wanted to thank you, and maybe we should do a post call in a couple of weeks with maybe one other a bit more information about these archetypes.
It's
But
been
thank you very
be
much,
here.
Jo.
And I've enjoyed sharing this with you, Agathe, and for all of our participants. And yeah, thank you. I'm available to answer any questions, as questions may come up. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we have a big thank you so much that is popping up. A lot of thank you, and this was very enlightening, and everybody's enjoyed very much. Terrific, says Kathy. So it's I'm sure you will have plenty of follow-up calls from our community. Thank you, Jo. I appreciate. I look forward to many more discussions with you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you, Agathe, and everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.